The planet Alvaron was a place of harshness and exploitation. Deep in the core of its bustling capital city, beyond the reach of its glittering towers and high-tech streets, lay a grim market where strange and powerful creatures were sold to the highest bidder. It was here that Kara, a towering alien woman, was to be auctioned off. Kara wasn't like most beings. Her kind, the Ja'ari, were large, almost 10 feet tall, with skin the color of polished stone. Her body was strong, and her muscles were built for the rough terrains of her homeworld. But it wasn't her strength that caught the attention of the Empire. It was her size. The Ja'ari were once seen as great warriors, but now their immense forms were considered impractical for breeding. As the Empire looked to control the galaxy's resources, Kara and her kind were discarded, sold for meat, a symbol of how even the strongest beings could be reduced to nothing more than products for consumption. Chains wrapped around Kara's wrists and ankles, clinking as she stood in the crowded pen. Her back was straight, her posture proud, but her eyes, those eyes that once gleamed with defiance, now held a sad resignation. The market was buzzing with noise, traders shouting, and the wealthy buyers eyeing the massive creatures like cattle. The Ja'ari were nothing more than tools to them. Kara had long since lost track of how many times she had been sold. Each time, the transaction was the same cold stares, the same whispers, the same people making decisions for her. She had been bred for war, bred for labor, and now she was nothing. Her massive frame was placed at the center of the stage. Despite the chains, she stood still, silent, as the bidding began. Her body gleamed in the harsh light above, and her wild hair, the color of midnight, fell around her shoulders. But there was no fire in her eyes now. There was no hope left. It had been drained from her long ago by those who treated her like an object, a piece of meat to be sold for profit. Next, we have this rare specimen, a Ja'ari female, perfect for... The auctioneer's voice rang out, his tone cold and transactional. He spoke of Kara as if she were nothing more than a commodity. A quick glance at her made it clear that the buyers didn't see the creature standing before them as a person. She was just another piece of property to them, worth more than a starship, but less than a human life. Kara heard the murmurs. She saw the looks of greed in their eyes as they tried to assess the value of her massive body, of the strength hidden beneath her skin. The Empire had already declared her kind unfit for breeding, but there was one thing they could still use her for: food. There was a price for meat, no matter the source. As the bids started to roll in, Kara didn't even flinch. She had seen this all before. The numbers flashed on the screen, each bid higher than the last, as if they were competing to see who could dehumanize her the fastest. But there was no stopping this. She was no longer her own. Yet amidst the noise of the auction, one sound broke through. Someone raised their voice, louder than the rest. "I'll take her." The words were simple, but they made Kara look up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. The voice came from a man in the back of the crowd, standing tall and confident. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were worn, and his face was weathered by the hardships of living on the outer colonies. He didn't seem interested in the bidding war, but his eyes were locked on Kara as though he saw something the others didn't. The auctioneer paused, his expression faltering, for a moment before he cleared his throat. "You sure, friend? This one's a big one." "You can find plenty of others for less," the auctioneer said, his voice dripping with dismissive amusement. "I'm sure," the man replied, his voice firm. "I'll take her." The bidding stopped. Kara's eyes narrowed as the man walked forward, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. He wasn't tall like her, but there was something about him, something that made her pause. He was human. The chains that bound her were removed without ceremony, but she didn't move. She had learned not to fight anymore. It wasn't worth it. She stood still, waiting for the next order, for the next thing they would do to her. But when the man's hand brushed against her arm, there was no violence in it, no force. He simply touched her, as if he were acknowledging her as something more than an object. "Come with me," the man said, his voice low but calm. Kara didn't understand why he would say such a thing. People didn't speak to her like that. They didn't treat her with any kind of respect. But something about him, his eyes, made her hesitate. For a brief moment, Kara felt the weight of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Was he kind? Or was this just another trick? Another person pretending to care only to make her feel something before he, too, used her for his own. Gain? She didn't know. But the feeling in her chest was different. It wasn't the same hollow feeling she'd grown used to. It was something new, something she couldn't name. The man led her toward a small shuttle, his pace steady, his grip light on her arm. As they boarded, she took one last look at the cruel marketplace, the people who had bid on her, and the empire that had reduced her to this. Kara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she was curious. Kara sat in the small shuttle, her eyes still filled with uncertainty as she watched the human sitting across from her. His name was Jordan, and he had bought her. The ride was quiet, the hum of the shuttle's engines the only sound that filled the space. Kara didn't know where they were going, but she knew she was leaving behind the market and the life she had known for so long. She studied him, trying to understand his motives. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were simple, made for survival, not for show. He had a rugged look about him, his dark hair slightly messy, and his face was marked by age and experience. But it was his eyes that intrigued her the most. There was kindness in them, something she hadn't seen in a long time. He didn't look at her with fear or greed, but with something more, respectful. Jordan glanced at Kara and smiled. Though she could see the uncertainty in his own eyes. He didn't know what to expect from her either. But he wasn't afraid. "You're probably wondering where we're going," Jordan said, breaking the silence. Kara didn't speak, but she gave a small nod. Her throat felt tight, as if she hadn't used her voice in years. She had been kept silent for so long that it was hard to remember what it felt like to speak. Jordan continued, "I'm taking you to my ship. It's small, but it's comfortable. You'll have your own space there." Kara's mind raced. A ship? Her heart hammered in her chest. A ship meant freedom. But then a thought stopped her. Was she really free? Or was this just another cage? She had been in enough cages to know what they felt like. She didn't trust anyone anymore. After all, she had been betrayed too many times. She had been used and sold like cattle. What was to stop Jordan from doing the same thing? Jordan must have sensed her hesitation because he spoke again, his tone softer this time. "I'm not here to use you, Kara. I bought you because I believe you deserve more than this. I don't want to hurt you. I want to help." Kara looked at him, trying to understand. Why was he different from the others? What did he want with her? She didn't know how to respond. So instead, she stayed silent. The shuttle flew for hours, cutting through the stars in a steady, calming rhythm. For the first time in a long while, Kara felt something other than fear or anger. She was curious. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way. Eventually, the shuttle landed on a small, quiet moon. Jordan led Kara off the ship and toward a nearby structure. It was small, surrounded by nothing but barren land and the cold, silent sky. But the moment they entered the building, Kara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Welcome to my home, Jordan," said, his voice gentle. He opened a door to a room that was much bigger than she expected. There was a bed, a table, and a few chairs. A window looked out at the dark, endless sky. Kara stepped inside and stood in the center of the room. She was still unsure of what to do. This wasn't a cage, but it wasn't exactly freedom either. She didn't know how to act or what to say. Jordan gave her space, sitting down on one of the chairs. "You're free to move around. I don't want to lock you in here, but I do need to know that you're safe." Kara didn't move for a long time. She just stood there, staring out the window. She could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. She was used to being controlled, to being told what to do. It was hard to imagine that she could actually make her own decisions now. Jordan waited, patiently, not pushing her. He seemed to understand that she needed time. After a while, he spoke again. "I know you're confused, but I want to help. You, Kara. I want to show you that there's more to life than just surviving. You can have a future. You can choose what you want." Kara slowly turned to face him. Her mind was still clouded with doubt, but his words were different. There was no anger or manipulation in them. There was only sincerity. She walked toward the table and sat down across from him, her massive form seeming to fill the room. She wasn't used to sitting in a chair, especially not one made for a human. Her legs stretched out awkwardly, but she didn't mind. It felt nice in a way. She hadn't had the chance to feel anything nice in so long. Jordan smiled softly as she sat. He wasn't looking at her with fear. He was looking at her as if he saw a person, not a beast. That was something Kara hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't have much to offer," Jordan said, leaning forward. "But what I do have, I'm willing to share. I'm not going to force you into anything. I just want you to feel like you have a choice." Kara stared at him for a moment, considering his words. This wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to make her fit into some mold. He was giving her the space to choose, something she hadn't been given in years. It was strange, and it was scary. But for the first time in a long time, Kara felt a flicker of hope. Could it be possible that she had a future beyond the chains? Could she have a life outside of being sold and used? Jordan stood and moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to think about it. Take your time." As he left the room, Kara stood up and walked over to the window again. She gazed out at the stars, the same stars she had seen all her life. But now they seemed different. They seemed endless, full of possibilities. For the first time in years, Kara felt something she had almost forgotten: freedom. It wasn't a perfect freedom, and it wasn't certain, but it was hers to explore, and that was more than she had ever dreamed. The days that followed were quiet, and for Kara, that was a strange feeling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't under constant supervision. She wasn't being treated like a thing to be controlled. Jordan didn't give her orders, and he never spoke to her as if she were beneath him. He treated her like a person, and that felt foreign. But Kara still wasn't sure if she could trust him completely. After all, she had been betrayed before, time and time again. Her kind had been used, sold, and tossed aside. Could Jordan truly be different? Or was he just another human who wanted to use her for his own gain? She spent her days walking around the small compound, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The barren land was quiet, and the sky above was endless, stretching out like an ocean of stars. It was a peaceful place, far from the cruelty of the empire. But still, there was a fear. In her heart, she couldn't let her guard down completely. She knew how quickly things could change. Jordan, for his part, continued to give her space. He never pressured her to talk, and he didn't try to force her into any kind of relationship. He simply offered her food, shelter, and the freedom to choose what she wanted to do. One evening, as Kara sat by the window, staring out at the horizon, she heard a sound in the distance. At first it was faint, barely noticeable. But soon the sound grew louder, and Kara's sharp ears picked up on the unmistakable hum of engines. Something was coming. She stood up, moving toward the door. She had no idea what it was, but her Instincts told her to be ready. Her past experiences had taught her to never let her guard down, no matter how peaceful things seemed. Jordan was in the other room, working on something. When he heard the sound, too, he quickly stood up, his expression shifting to one of concern. "Stay inside," he said quickly, his voice calm but urgent. "I'll check it out." Kara didn't argue. She could see the worry in his eyes, and she didn't want to make things harder for him. But she couldn't just sit by and do nothing. The threat was out there, and she had to be ready for it. She stepped toward the door, her massive frame blocking the entrance. She wasn't about to let anyone harm Jordan, not if she could help it. Jordan glanced at her, his face filled with understanding. "You're right. Stay close." The two of them walked outside where the sound of the engines had grown much louder. The sky was still dark, but there was a growing sense of danger in the air. Kara's heart began to race as they made their way toward the noise. She could see the outline of ships in the distance, dark figures against the starry sky. "I don't like this," Jordan muttered. "It's too soon." Kara didn't know what he meant by that, but she could feel the tension in the air. She wasn't sure who these ships belonged to, but she had a sinking feeling in her gut. The ships landed on the dusty ground, and Kara's senses were immediately on high alert. From the first ship, several figures emerged. They were armed, their movements purposeful and precise. They didn't look like ordinary traders or travelers. These were soldiers, bounty hunters from the look of them. Jordan's face went pale when he saw them. "I knew it," he said softly. "They're from the Empire." Kara's fists clenched at her sides. The Empire had come for her. They weren't going to let her go so easily, but this time, things were different. She wasn't just a captive, to be sold. She had something to fight for now. She stepped forward, her large frame casting a shadow over Jordan, who was now standing next to her. "You need to stay behind me," she said in a low voice. The words were rough, but they carried the weight of her determination. Jordan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. He knew better than to argue with her. He had seen what she was capable of, and he wasn't going to let his pride get in the way. The bounty hunters approached, their weapons raised, and their expressions cold. "Step aside, human," one of them barked. "We're here for the Jari. Hand her over." Kara's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not going anywhere with you," the lead bounty hunter sneered. "You're a slave, just like the rest of your kind. You belong to the Empire, whether you like it or not." Jordan stepped forward, his voice firm. "She's not a slave anymore, and she's not going back to the Empire." The bounty hunters laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the night. "You're making a mistake, human. The Empire doesn't take kindly to people who interfere with their business." Kara felt the air grow tense. She could feel the anger building inside her. These men didn't see her as a person. They saw her as property, and she wouldn't stand for that anymore. Without warning, she moved, her powerful legs pushing her forward with lightning speed. She knocked the first bounty hunter aside, sending him flying through the air with a single, powerful swing of her arm. The others took a step back, surprised by her strength. But they didn't hesitate for long. They opened fire, their weapons crackling with energy. Kara blocked the shots with ease, using her massive form as a shield. She could feel the heat of the blasts as they hit her, but they didn't penetrate her tough skin. She was a warrior, bred for battle, and these men were no match for her. Jordan ducked behind her, his heart racing. He had never seen Kara fight like this before. She moved with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for someone of her size. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the bounty hunters quickly realized that they had underestimated her. "You're going to regret this," one of them shouted, but Kara was already on the move, charging toward them. She grabbed one of the soldiers by the arm and swung him into the others, knocking them to the ground. Jordan watched in awe as Kara fought with all the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. The Empire had tried to break her, but they had failed. She was free now, and nothing was going to take that away. The remaining bounty hunters hesitated, unsure whether they could defeat Kara, but they soon realized that they had no choice but to retreat. One by one they fled, leaving behind their fallen comrades. Kara stood tall, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The battle was over, but the danger wasn't gone. She knew that this was just the beginning. The Empire wouldn't stop coming for her, but now she was ready. She had something worth fighting for, and for the first time in her life she wasn't fighting alone. The days after the battle with the bounty hunters passed quietly, but the tension was thick in the air. Kara and Jordan both knew that this brief victory wouldn't be the end. The Empire was powerful, and they wouldn't simply let Kara go. The bounty hunters had been just the beginning, and more would come. Kara spent her days adjusting to life on the small moon. The compound Jordan had called home was simple, with nothing but the basics. There was food, shelter, and the quiet, peace of a place far from the Empire's reach. It should have felt like freedom, but Kara couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something worse. Jordan, on the other hand, was focused on the present. He knew they had to prepare for what was to come, but he also understood that Kara needed time. She needed time to heal, to regain a sense of herself. And in that time, he was determined to show her that there was a life beyond survival, beyond the horrors she had faced. Each day, Jordan would try to teach her about his world. They spent hours talking, and though Kara was silent for most of it, he could see her listening. She was learning, understanding, and for the first time in a long time, she seemed to be thinking about something other than the past. One evening, after they had finished their meal, Jordan leaned back and looked at Kara. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. Kara glanced at him, her piercing eyes meeting his. "I know strength," she replied in a deep voice, her words heavy with experience. "But strength alone is not enough." Jordan nodded slowly. He had seen the way she had fought off the bounty hunters. He had seen her power. But he also knew that the strength she carried wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something forged through pain and loss. "You're right," Jordan said. "But it's not just about fighting, Kara. It's about choosing what you fight for." Kara didn't respond. She turned away and looked out the window, her gaze focused on the stars. She had fought for so long, fought against the Empire, fought for survival. But what was she fighting for now? She didn't know. That night, as the sky grew dark and the stars twinkled above them, Kara found herself sitting outside the compound, staring at the endless horizon. The quiet was soothing, but there was still a restlessness in her. The thoughts of the Empire of her past filled her mind. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Jordan approaching. He was carrying a small package in his hand. Without saying a word, he sat beside her, opening the package to reveal 2 small cups of tea. "Thought you might like some," he said with a slight smile. Kara took the cup from him, grateful for the gesture. She had never tasted anything like this before. The warmth of the tea was comforting, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. But the questions, the doubts, still lingered. "I don't know if I can ever forget what I've been through," she said quietly, her voice low. Jordan sat quietly for a moment, considering her words. "You don't have to forget. You just have to learn to live beyond it." Kara looked at him, searching his face for any sign of falsehood. But there was none. He spoke with honesty, with understanding. "How do you do that?" she asked. Jordan's expression softened. "It's not easy. But I think it's about accepting that we can't change the past, only what we do with the present." Kara looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening around the handle. The words seemed simple, but they carried weight. She had spent her life running from her past, trying to survive it, but she had never truly faced it. Could she really let go of the anger, the fear that had controlled her for so long? Jordan's voice broke through her thoughts. I don't expect you to change overnight, Kara, but I believe you have a choice now. You can choose what you want your future to be. For the first time, Kara felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a sudden change, but a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the pain she had known. Maybe there was something worth fighting for, something beyond survival. The next few days were a blur of training and quiet conversations. Jordan continued to teach her, showing her how to survive in ways she had never been taught before. He taught her how to use the weapons she had kept hidden, how to navigate through the galaxy, and how to protect herself without relying solely on her strength. But it wasn't just about fighting. Jordan also shared his dreams with her. He spoke of a world where people weren't treated like property, where there was justice for everyone. It was a dream that seemed impossible, but Kara couldn't help but be moved by it. For the first time, she began to think that perhaps she could be part of something bigger than herself. Maybe she could be a part of that dream. As the days turned into weeks, Kara's bond with Jordan grew. She had come to see him not as a savior, but as an ally, someone who saw her for who she truly was. And in return, she began to trust him, not completely, but enough to let him in. One evening, as they sat together by a small fire, Kara spoke again. I've been thinking, she said, her voice hesitant. I've been running for so long, I don't know if I can keep running. Jordan looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to run anymore, Kara. Not from your past. Not from the Empire. You have a future now, and I'll fight for it with you. Kara nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to carry the burden by herself. Together, they could face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long while, Kara felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over. But with Jordan by her side, maybe it didn't have to be a fight for survival anymore. Maybe it could be a fight for something better. The silence that followed the night by the fire hung in the air like a promise. Kara could feel the weight of it, the shift within her, as if something deep inside had changed. The anger, the fear, the pain that had controlled her for so long, they were still there. But they were no longer the only thing she carried. She had learned to trust, little by little, and with that trust came a quiet strength she hadn't known she could possess. Jordan had become more than just her ally. He was someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. He didn't see her as a weapon, a beast, or something to be feared. He saw her as Kara, as a person. That thought, simple as it was, filled her with something new. Hope. They spent the days training, learning, and talking. Jordan taught her more about his world, the resistance he had fought for, and the ideals that had shaped him. She had listened, and though the dreams seemed far-fetched, they began to take root in her heart. She had never imagined that there could be a future beyond the Empire's control, a future where people fought for freedom, for justice. But the more they prepared, the more Kara felt the pull of something she had been avoiding, the Empire. It loomed in the background like a shadow, always there, always watching. She couldn't outrun it forever. Jordan could see the change in her, the shift in her resolve. He had known from the start that the Empire would never let her go, that their grip on her kind was too strong. But he believed more than anything that Kara could be the key to changing everything. She was strong, powerful, and she had a fire inside her that could burn through the Empire's control if given the chance. One morning, as the sun began to rise, Kara stood on the edge of the compound, looking out at the horizon. The wind brushed against her skin, and she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. But there was something new in the air today, a sense of purpose, a sense of clarity. Jordan approached her, his footsteps soft on the dirt. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her looking out at the same view. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. "You know what we have to do," Jordan said, finally breaking the silence. Kara nodded slowly, her expression serious. "I do." The Empire had come for her once, and they would come again. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she had something to fight for. She had a purpose beyond survival, beyond simply escaping her past. She had a future where she could choose her path, where she could stand up against the tyranny that had controlled her life for so long. Jordan's voice was firm, but there was a quiet determination in it. "We're not just fighting for you, Kara. We're fighting for everyone the Empire has oppressed, for everyone who's been enslaved, sold, and forgotten." Kara's heart raced as she heard his words. She had never thought about it that way before. She had always seen herself as a victim of the Empire, but she was more than that. She was a symbol of resistance, of defiance. She could be the spark that ignited something bigger, something that could change the galaxy. "Then let's do it," Kara said, her voice strong, filled with the same determination that burned in Jordan's eyes. Jordan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Kara feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something worth living for. Over the next few weeks, they began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. They gathered supplies, weapons, and information. Jordan used his contacts to reach out to the rebellion, to those who had fought the Empire for years. The resistance was growing, but it wasn't enough. They needed something more, a symbol, a leader. They needed Kara. She trained harder than ever, learning how to use the weapons, how to navigate through hostile territory, and how to work with the resistance fighters. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was a leader, a figure of hope, and that terrified her. The thought of leading others, of standing at the forefront of a battle against the Empire, was overwhelming. Kara had always fought alone, trusting only in her own strength. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person the Empire had crushed, for every world they had destroyed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the land, Kara stood in front of the small group of resistance fighters. They had gathered in the compound, ready for the next step in their plan. Jordan stood beside her, his eyes focused on the group. "We're not just fighting for freedom. We're fighting for the future. For a world where no one is treated as property. A world where everyone has the right to choose their destiny." Kara felt the weight of their gaze on her, the hope, the fear, the uncertainty. She was their leader now. They were looking to her for guidance. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her towering form commanding attention. "This is just the beginning," Kara said, her voice steady and powerful. "The Empire thinks they can control us, but they're wrong. We are more than their slaves. We are more than their property. We are free, and we will fight for our freedom." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filled with renewed hope. Kara felt a surge of energy, a feeling she had never experienced before. It was not just the fire of battle, it was the fire of purpose. She wasn't just a weapon, she was a leader, a symbol of defiance. Jordan stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're ready, Kara." For the first time, Kara believed him. She was ready, and together, they would face the Empire, not as victims, but as warriors. The tension in the air was thick as Kara and Jordan stood at the edge of the compound, looking out over the landscape. The Empire's forces were coming, and there was no turning back now. Kara had trained for this moment for weeks, preparing herself and the resistance for the battle that would determine their future. Jordan stood beside her, his expression calm, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with determination and a hint of worry. He knew the stakes of this fight. If they lost, it wasn't just the end of their freedom, it would be the end of any hope for the galaxy. The Empire would crush anyone who stood in their way, and they had already shown how far they were willing to go. "We have one chance, Kara," Jordan said, his voice steady. "We can't let them take you back. We can't let them win." Kara turned to him, her eyes filled with the same resolve. She had never wanted to be a leader, but now she understood why she had to be. The Empire had taken so much from her people, but they wouldn't take her anymore. She wouldn't let them take anyone else. "I'm not going anywhere," Kara replied firmly. "Not this time." The resistance had gathered in the compound, each person ready for the fight that lay ahead. Kara had been leading them with confidence, and they had all come to respect her, not just for her strength, but for her spirit. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been oppressed, for everyone who had been treated like property. Jordan stepped forward, addressing the group. "Today, we take the fight to the Empire. We may be small, but we have something they don't: the will to fight for what's right. Kara isn't just a symbol of our freedom. She is our strength, and together we will show the Empire that they can't control us." The fighters nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had all seen the Empire's cruelty, and they had all felt the sting of oppression. Now they were ready to stand together, ready to fight back. Kara turned to the group, her voice booming with authority. "We fight for our freedom. We fight for our future. We fight for everyone who has been silenced by the Empire. Let them come. We will stand tall, and we will make sure they know that we are not afraid." The cheers that followed her words were loud, echoing across the compound. The fighters, once uncertain and hesitant, now stood united, their spirits lifted by Kara's words. They weren't just a group of rebels anymore. They were a force, a family, bound by a common cause. The plan was set. The resistance would strike at the heart of the Empire's operations, targeting key installations and weakening their hold on the region. Kara would lead them, her strength and her leadership the key to their success. The Empire might be powerful, but they were not invincible. The first wave of fighters moved out under the cover of darkness, using the terrain to their advantage. They had the element of surprise, and they intended to use it. Kara and Jordan stayed in the rear, coordinating the attack and ensuring that the resistance remained organized. The sounds of distant gunfire echoed across the land, a reminder of the war that was unfolding. As they neared their target, Kara's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She had fought for so long, but now it wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure that the Empire's grip was broken, that no one else would have to suffer like she had. "We're almost there," Jordan said, his voice tense over the comms. "Stay alert." Kara nodded, her eyes scanning the area. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was to come. They were about to face the Empire head-on, and it wasn't going to be easy. But Kara knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone. She had the resistance. She had Jordan. And she had herself, and that was enough. The signal came through, and the attack began. The resistance fighters moved quickly, striking at the Empire's forces with precision and skill. Kara led the charge, her massive form cutting through the enemy ranks. Her strength was unmatched, and her fury was unstoppable. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting for the freedom of everyone who had been oppressed, everyone who had been silenced by the Empire. Jordan moved beside her, directing the fighters and making sure that their plan was executed flawlessly. The Empire's forces fought back with everything they had, But it wasn't enough. The resistance was too strong, too determined. Kara had shown them what it meant to fight for something greater than themselves, and now they were all willing to give everything for the cause. The battle raged on for hours, the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through the night. But slowly, the tide began to turn. The Empire's forces were retreating, their lines breaking as the resistance pushed forward. Kara was at the front, her body covered in sweat and dust, but her resolve was as strong as ever. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Empire's forces began to fall back, their retreat a clear sign of their defeat. The resistance had won. The Empire had lost. Kara stood in the middle of the battlefield, her chest heaving as she took in the sight of the victory. The fight was over. They had done it. The Empire had been defeated, and for the first time, Kara could feel the weight of it all lift from her shoulders. Jordan walked up to her, his face tired but filled with pride. "You did it, Kara. We did it." Kara looked around at the faces of the resistance fighters. They were battered and bruised, but their eyes were filled with triumph. They had won not just a battle, but a war. They had taken down the Empire's grip on their lives, and they had fought for the future they wanted. Kara turned to Jordan, a small smile forming on her lips. "We all did it," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "This was for all of us." And in that moment, Kara realized that she had found something she had never thought possible. She had found a future where she could choose her own path, a future where she was no longer a tool of the Empire, but a free being. The fight wasn't over, but this was a victory worth celebrating.